Pakistan to a drone war in Pakistan. So it's taking war into new places. And war is not something that's always easily controlled. You risk escalation into larger forms of war. Never mind that dozens of nations now have this technology. Only 3 have thus far used it to go kill anybody in somebody else's country, but dozens of nations have it. And if this becomes acceptable policy for 3 nations, the United Kingdom and Israel and the United States, why not for others? So this is the danger. And top experts by the dozens in the US military and so-called intelligence agencies, Stanley McChrystal on down, all admit quite openly and repeatedly that it's counterproductive on its own terms, that you create at least 10 new enemies for every one you kill. Right? So never mind morality, legality, environmental destruction, the rule of law, stability of governments, it is creating hatred of the United States. You never hear about anti-Canadian terrorist networks, anti-Norwegian terrorist networks, right? It is the nation that invests $1 trillion a year in so-called defense that generates the hostility. And then because it generates the hostility, you have to buy more weapons, sell more weapons to more dictatorships. And it's a vicious cycle because you generate more enemies. And so we have to change this entire outlook before more blowback and more escalation and more secrecy. You know, when there's a public proposal to send missiles into Syria, we're able to say no, and we said no. When there's a public proposal to put more sanctions on Iran and tear up the agreement and commit the United States to joining any war between Israel and Iran, we're able to stop that. But when they send these missiles without asking anybody, we can't say no. We don't have that opportunity. This is the danger of moving into this new type of war. All the stories this week about the military budget shrinking, by the way, are false. The proposal from the Pentagon is to increase the military budget over the level agreed to in the sequester. And it is, as Waleed described, a changed military, not a smaller military. It's fewer troops, fewer benefits for existing troops, and more weapons. Lockheed Martin's stock is higher than it has ever been in history. So this is the danger we're up against. And we're up against it under the rule of a president who holds more power than any human being has ever held before in the history of the earth, who sought to extend the war in Iraq and failed, who is trying very, very hard to keep the war in Afghanistan going, who tripled it, who created this chaos in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and now is hoping that the next president of Afghanistan will allow 10,000 troops to stay, who took us into an illegal war in Libya, who tried to do the same in Syria, who has created the phenomenon of drone wars, expanded secret wars, expanded foreign bases, and radically expanded the sale of weapons to brutal governments around the world. We have gone from the Bush administration of torturing people to the Obama administration of murdering people. And we have gone from the Bush administration of crimes to the Obama administration of open, accepted policy and the pretense that policy is law. And I mean on warrantless spying and lawless imprisonment and kidnap and rendition and assassination of human beings. So my position is that war can't be civilized, and that if you switch to a type of war that you think is going to be safer, and you ignore the hatred you're creating, and you ignore the very strong likelihood of blowback in the future, you are asking for trouble. So worldbeyondwar.org, which Summer mentioned, and I have these cards I'd love to pass around if there's a volunteer who would hand these around, is a new organization. About 60 nations, people in about 60 nations have already signed our little declaration of peace in the past few weeks, and we're trying to build a global movement advancing a number of different strategies toward the elimination of all war. I think the story of heroism that Waleed closed with is tremendous. Suicide is also the #1 killer of active members of the US military. But when those people die, nobody thinks of them as heroes. And when a man who has been part of murdering over 1,600 people with U.S. drones goes public with his regrets and his suicidal thoughts, people appreciate the publicity about what he was doing, but nobody thinks of him as a hero. There is nothing heroic. This is a Milgram experiment gone completely out of control. This is not an actor pretending to be a doctor telling you to push a button and shock the person in the next room, which most people around the world will agree to do just on the basis of authority. This is really accepting someone's authority that you should push a button and murder somebody and anybody who's close by. And the regret and the post-traumatic stress disorder is tremendous, and there's nothing natural about it. There is not a single case in world history of post-traumatic stress disorder from war deprivation. You only get it from war participation. I'll just close by mentioning that down the road where I live in Charlottesville, we passed the first anti-drone resolution in the country through our city council, since when 4 other cities around the country have done so. And it's something I strongly encourage your bringing to the Richmond City Council. And I also encourage pushing for VCU divestment from weapons companies, which is a strategy that's being pursued around the country as well. And thank you very, very much for coming out here.
Thank you, David. So if you think that, like, the United States can come up with an alternative to drones, particularly?
Well, there exists an alternative. It's called the rule of law. If you believe that someone has committed a crime, you indict them, you present evidence to a grand jury, you get an indictment, you seek their extradition, you prosecute, and if you can, you convict them. And the pretense that it is difficult to extradite people from various countries is wildly overstated. And the pretense that these drone victims were beyond capture is in many cases documented to be absolutely false, including a teenage boy who spent a number of days in a large city in Pakistan at an anti-drone conference, could have been quite easily picked up and arrested, and were there any charges against him, who instead was targeted with a missile and murdered a couple days later when he went out to photograph the damage of previous drone strikes. So this is a choice to murder. This is a choice that they've made, that they talk about as cleaner. Cleaner meaning they get less trouble from us, because there's not somebody sitting in Guantanamo for us to get mad about, for us to worry about whether they're being treated humanely. They've been murdered, and that's cleaner. Well, it's dirtier. It's dirtier, and what's the alternative to killing people with drones? Not killing people with drones is the alternative. Nobody else is doing it. No other nation on earth believes they have the need to do it. Why in the world should the United States?
Thank you. So now we're going to move on to our final speaker, Abdelfi Wazir, who actually has a PowerPoint she would like to share with you.